Good morning. You hear me okay? Is there a way to increase it? Actually, move it closer to my mouth. There we go. Is that better? I'll project a little bit as well. Last week, Andy came up to me after class. Andy has such a beautiful, soft heart, very Christ-like person. I see God in you, Andy. Thank you. Andy made a point. He said, these Beatitudes, let me go backward. I think I'm going the wrong way. Let's see. I think I did too. I might have. Let's see, where'd they go? I thought I had a list of them in here. Okay, well we'll go from that one. Maybe if I stood over here, I can look at the screen and look at y'all at the same time. So Andy made the point that these categories of people that are mentioned in the Beatitudes, that Christ says these are the categories of people that you want to find yourself in. But the world doesn't necessarily want to be in these categories. These are not the kind of categories that most people think about being in. I want to be a movie star, or I want to be, a politician, or I want to be somebody important. Being pure in heart is not something that maybe outside of the church that a lot of people aspire to. In fact, in Romans chapter 1 that we're going to look at in just a minute, God, as Tim mentioned in his sermon, God turns his face from evil. But he sees, and this gets back to this idea of what God sees when he looks at us. He looks at the heart. He looks at those who are righteous. He looks at those who are he looks for those who are seeking him. So in these categories of people, if you realize that you have a need for God and that you realize your spiritual poverty, God is going to bless you. Okay? From a worldly perspective, realizing humbleness and being in the category of someone who's mourning, those are not necessarily what most people aspire to. But Christ says, if you want to really make a difference, aspire to these types of categories, be in these types of groups. And that's hard, because the last one down there is if you're persecuted and mocked for doing, But that is one of the richest. That one has one of the richest blessings of the entire group. Rejoice, because great is your reward. The promise is you're going to inherit the kingdom of heaven, and you're going to have a great reward in heaven. Okay, both of those are mentioned in that verse together. So thank you, Andy, for making that point. So, who did their homework? You remember your homework from last week?
Most homework I thought of it this morning, so I was procrastinating to the end. So I was thinking about how did we see God this week, right? Is that the homework?
The homework was, yes. Did you see God this week? Anyone? Anyone want to share an experience? Okay, go ahead. There you go. That's right. Let's look. Go ahead.
I was thinking about yesterday. Lisa Melman got the teen girls together. They went out and had a girls' day.
Mm-hmm.
They went out to lunch together, and they went to an activity together. So I saw God and her, getting them together, and then they can spend their day any way they want, right? They decided to spend it together. So I think I saw God reflected in that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fellowship.
Anyone else?
Well, you see God in all His creation, all the beautiful flowers and everything.
Yes.
birds.
Yes. And that's what we're going to look at in Romans chapter 1. Anyone else want to share an experience? Here's another question for you. And I have to ask myself this question daily. Did you look for God this week? Were you actively seeking? I love Psalm chapter 27. I think it's, well, let me just make sure. I think it's verse 8, 27:8. It's probably one of my favorite Psalms of all of them. My heart. Remember last week we talked about this is a heart condition. Blessed are the pure in heart. And this idea of the heart, we could go in depth on for a long time. My heart said to you, your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. Almost identical to the verse that Tim read for us this morning. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, have mercy upon me and answer me. When you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, Lord, I will seek. And then in verse 13, I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would, what? See the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Let's look at some other verses that have the term blessed in them. Matthew 13, we're going to spend a little bit of time in Matthew 13. Blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. So there's that same word, blessed, makarioi is the Greek word. Remember, there's two sides to being blessed. There's the one who is giving the blessing, and there's the one who is receiving the blessing. In the case of the Beatitudes and in the case of the other instances where we have similar phrases that are similar to the Beatitudes, it's God who is doing the blessing, and it's the person who is receiving the blessing that gets the promise. So we see that parallel structure not only in the Beatitudes, but it runs through all the other blessings that are pronounced throughout the New Testament. Luke 10, when they were alone, he turned to the disciples and said, blessed are the eyes that see what you have seen. And again, I want to emphasize that I believe that when Jesus made certain statements, he was referring to the immediate context. I see Gaines sitting in the pew there, but I think he was also referring in a greater context to when you see, when you perceive, when you acknowledge that God is present and that God is working, and you see God in other people and you see God in creation. Blessed are the eyes that see what you have seen. Right. Right. That's exactly right. Exactly. And what I'm trying to emphasize and what I'm trying to say, thank you, Clark, is that these blessings apply to us. We are in these categories, or our heart's desire should want to be in these categories. The process of purifying our heart is, again, something that we could spend weeks looking at, how we could possibly purify our hearts, all the ways we can do that. John 20, Jesus told them, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." So it gets back to this idea of what we see is what we don't see. It's not a matter of seeing the physical, okay? Like a minute ago I mentioned I can see Gaines sitting in the pew there. But if I look deep enough, I see God there. And Christ mentioned this when he talked about the judgment day. I believe this is in Matthew 25. Let me take a look. Yes, Matthew 25:34. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance in the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." And then he goes through and he says, "I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was a stranger, I needed clothes, I was sick, I was in prison." And then what did those people say? What did they say in the judgment? When did we see you? When did we see you sick? When did we see you without clothes? I think the point's obvious. James 1:12. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation afterward. Here is an almost exact parallel grammatically to Matthew chapter 5 and the Beatitudes. There's God who's doing the blessing. There's someone who is receiving the blessing. The blessing is the one who patiently endures testing and temptation. Revelation 22:14. They will be permitted to enter the gates of the city. There's the promise. You wash your robes. Again, this is another metaphor. This is another way of saying purifying your heart, purifying your life, purifying your soul. They will be permitted to enter the gates and eat from the fruit of the tree of life. So let's look at Matthew 13 now. And this gets back to what Clark was alluding to, that the audience to which Jesus was speaking in the book of Matthew was Jews. They were looking for the promised Messiah. He was trying to tell them that he was the fulfillment of that prophecy. And as we studied with Jay in Isaiah, Jesus makes this point here that I alluded to a couple of weeks ago when I said God hides in plain sight, but it's almost like there's a privileged elite group of people that get to understand and that get to comprehend what spirituality is really all about. And we are blessed to be able to be in that group of people as the church. The church itself is a group of blessed people. And that is expounded upon in Ephesians chapter 2 in very beautiful terms. But you are permitted, I find that very interesting, you are permitted to understand the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but others are not. To those who listen to my teaching, here's another promise. More understanding will be given. And they will have an abundance of knowledge. But those who are not listening, even what little understanding they have, will be taken away from them. Okay? And the Apostle Paul expounds on this in Romans chapter 1. We'll look at that one as well. That's why I use these parables. Here is Jesus explaining why he uses parables, why he seemingly talks in mysterious ways and in mysterious terms. And this gets back to my premise that I believe that Jesus used words, nouns, phrases, verbs. He used them in immediate context, but he also used them in a spiritual context. I think the spiritual context was always uppermost in Christ's mind, and if you will, the absolute context of being God himself, and God speaking and being the Word of God in the relative existence that we're in, but using language and using words and using teaching methods that in some ways concealed the message, God hiding in plain sight again. And some people would hear that and misunderstand it. Other people would hear it and understand it. And it's interesting that Christ says here, they're permitted to understand it. And others are not. So if we understand it, if we see God, we're in that elite group of having been permitted to see God. It's thank you, Lord. And here is maybe the most important part of Matthew chapter 13. For the hearts of these people are hardened, and their ears cannot hear, and they have closed their eyes, so that their eyes cannot see, and their ears cannot hear, and their hearts cannot understand. So this gets back to the whole idea of blessed are the pure in heart. That heart condition has to be right. Blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. And here's the quote that Clark was alluding to. I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but they didn't see. And longed to hear what you hear, but they didn't hear it. And again, we are privileged to be in that group. I think I've gone through this slide before, made this point. The way Jesus used words. Are we on slide 18? You remember the story in John chapter 9 where where Jesus healed the man born blind, and his apostles, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? You remember what Christ's answer was to that question? He said, it's so the works of God could be made manifest in him. Made manifest means revealed, not concealed, made evident. Okay? And he got into an argument with the Pharisees after he healed that man. Even his own parents were afraid that they were going to be cast out of the temple. And Jesus' response to the Pharisees was, the Pharisees asked him, are we blind? Are we blind? Because he had said, you know, if you could see who I am, you would understand why this man now can see. If you were blind, you would have no sin. This is a turn of the phrase here. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains. This is to me one of the most I hesitate to use the word, but one of the most condemning things that Christ says to anyone in the New Testament. If you were blind, you would have no sin, but now you say we see. In other words, they thought they had everything all figured out about the Messiah and what was going to happen with the Roman Empire and how God was going to save the nation of Israel. They thought they knew. They thought they could see. They thought that, that they were looking at the Scriptures and they were seeing what God was going to do. And they refused to acknowledge that Jesus was who he was, that he was the fulfillment of everything that had come before. They didn't want to see. Their hearts were hardened. They were not convinced and would not be convinced. So Jesus said, basically, you think you know everything, and this is something that we have to be careful about ourselves, is that if we think we've got everything all figured out about the whole counsel of God, there's going to be a whole lot more that we're going to have to realize that we're going to be learning. Right. So how do we purify our heart? There's a lot of different ways that we could look at. There's we could spend a lot of time on this. I'll go through these real quickly. One way is mentioned in Matthew chapter 7, asking, seeking, and knocking. There again, seeking, notice, it's almost as if you sat down and read the New Testament, or actually if you read the whole Bible, and just said, I'm just going to look for the word see, or the word look, or the word seek, and just focused on what God has to say about seeing and seeking and looking. It's almost overwhelming. Another method is taking the long view. We're going to take a good, hard, long look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And, of course, the verse that Tim alluded to this morning, being able to see by faith. Faith is a vision, a way of looking beyond, farther, over the horizon, seeing into eternity rather than being focused on the relative and being focused on what's in front of us, being focused on our own problems and so on, taking the long view, looking further, higher, may be a better way of saying it. Tim also alluded to this verse recently, Proverbs chapter 4, guard your heart. David prayed in Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart. How often have you prayed for God to clean your heart, to purify your heart? Philippians 4, verse 8, whatever things are pure, what's the rest of that verse? Think about these things, focus on these things, concentrate, meditate on these things. I said last week, you have to be an active participant in purifying your heart. God purifies your heart. Jesus purifies your heart when you become a Christian, when you're baptized. Okay? Just like I alluded to last week, God does the deep cleaning, but you have to do the maintenance work. You have to do the dusting every now and then. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Our present troubles are small and won't last very long, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. All right, let's turn over and look at Romans chapter 1. Just real quick. How are we on time? What have I got, about 5 minutes? 10 minutes? So starting in verse 18, the wrath, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen. Being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts, here we are, back to the hearts, okay? Being able to see God is a heart matter. Their hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, like the circumstance in John chapter 9, I lost my place. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts. And then in 28, there's this litany, this category of all the things that for us are actually a very good list of things, a good checklist to make sure that if you're focused on purifying your heart, make sure that you're not in any of these categories, okay? it's a terrible thing to think that God has given someone over to a depraved, to depravity. To think about God seeing that and doing that. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy. Well, envy doesn't sound like such a bad thing, does it? But if you have envy in your heart, God is not going to be happy. Murder, we look at that and we think, well, I'm not ever going to be in that category. Hopefully, strife. Well, I don't know about strife. Sometimes I have strife in my heart. Sometimes I cause strife. I've caused some strife for some of my employers and some of my employees as well. Causing strife for your spouse, causing strife in your family. Are there ways that we can look at ourselves and look at our habits and say, do I need to look into my heart and see if there's any strife there? Deceit, malice, gossiping. I've been guilty of that. Especially in family situations, we gossip about Uncle so-and-so and grandchild so-and-so, and, got to watch out for that. Slanderers, God haters, insolence. I have a problem with insolence sometimes. Arrogance, boastful. Sometimes I have a problem with that. I don't know that I've ever invented ways of doing evil. It would never even enter my mind to think about inventing ways of doing evil. I think I would have to really bend my mind to that. Disobedient to their parents. Senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless, although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but they approve of those who practice them. So God has made it evident through the creation and through the things that we see and through the church and through the people that we interact with, that it's very evident that God is present and God is active in our lives. Does that mean I still have 5 minutes left, or does that mean that's the end? That's the end? Okay. Any comments, any questions before we say goodbye? All right. Thank you.